OnePeterFive is a crowd-funded traditional Catholic online journal. We are dependent on your donations to keep this content free for all. Please make a tax-deductible donation to our spring fundraiser at onepeterfive.com/donate. Most of all, the most important thing that we always want to emphasize, which we'll get back to in a minute, is the primacy of the spiritual. The primacy of the spiritual. The spiritual is everything, and the cross first and foremost. Most of all, in order to be crusaders against modernism and for Christendom, crusaders must take up the cross above all. We must, again, love suffering. If we want to be against modernism, we need to be against the modernist addiction to pleasure, addiction to comfort, which leads ultimately to the vice of effeminacy, which is the vice of effeminacy is the addiction to pleasure, which causes a reluctance to suffer, according to St. Thomas. This is a critical spiritual aspect of every Christian's life. We make the sign of the cross for a reason. We make the sign of the cross because the cross is our life. The cross is our life. Our Lord said, unless you take up your cross and die. Taking up your cross and following Jesus, you know what that meant when he said that? It meant you go to die in the most humiliating, excruciating fashion that was known at that time. Jesus Christ says, unless you accept all this suffering that I accept in my passion and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. This is the only path to resurrection. If you want to rebuild Christendom, you must take up your cross. And this is the primacy of the spiritual. We must. And so what I mean by that is we can get really caught up in the vice of curiosity. The vice of curiosity, St. Thomas says, is the obsession with useless knowledge, which ultimately hinders your spiritual life. So we can get caught up in the corruption of the Vatican or things. We can get caught up and wonder and be following news on Twitter and all these things that are happening. And we can get caught up in the vice of curiosity. Now, we need to understand what's going on to be aware, especially as fathers. Fathers need to be aware of what's going on so they can protect their children, their family, but not to an excessive degree. So the primacy of the spiritual, this is the first and foremost. Once we do the spiritual, then and only then can we deal with the crisis in the church. So where do we fit at OnePeterFive? Well, what we need to do at this point, now where we're at is we have been sort of restarted with Traditiones Custodes. We're in a similar situation that our fathers were in 1969 and 1970. What did our fathers do at that time when the Latin Mass was suppressed at that time? So the enemies of Christ induced the Holy Father in 1969 to suppress the Latin Mass. As we know, as Benedict XVI told us, it was never actually technically suppressed, but de facto, it certainly was suppressed. We need to look back at what our fathers did at that time. This is what it means, first and foremost, to unite the clans at OnePeterFive. Is what we want to do is we want to return to the zeal of our fathers. Because our fathers already fought this fight and won. They won with Summorum Pontificum. Obviously, it wasn't the full fight, but it was a massive win. It was, Summorum Pontificum was an exoneration of the traditionalist movement that had been vilified for some 40 years as schismatic. It was an exoneration of this so-called schismatic movement that had been vilified and condemned. It was an exoneration. They fought for 40 years plus, and they were exonerated. So now we need to fight for another 40 years plus so that our movement also can be exonerated. And the good thing is we're in a much better position than our fathers were at that time. But how we see the first thing, how to unite the clans against the St. Gallen Mafia. So I'm finally getting to the point of what I wanted to get to here. How do we unite the clans? Well, we return to the zeal of our forefathers. And so what is the zeal of our forefathers? Well, in the editorial stance, we talk about some of the godfathers of the traditionalist movement, especially after it began a new era. So traditionalism in the modern era since 1773, traditionalism in its essence of truth, goodness, and beauty is the anchor against modernism, defined as Pius X does in Pascendi as the false evolution of dogma. This was condemned at Vatican I as whoever says that the doctrines may evolve according to a greater knowledge in a way that's different than what the church understood and understands, let it be anathema. This is traditionalism in and of itself. Now, there is a true development of doctrine that is an actual true development against the evolution, the false evolution of the modernists. But traditionalism itself, as a school of thought, is providing the anchor against the false evolution of doctrine by the modernists and for Christendom, for rebuilding the city of God. So, who are the godfathers of this movement? This is what OnePeterFive, what we want to do is first and foremost, the primacy of the spiritual is the greatest Thomist theologian of the 20th century, Father Reginald Gary Goulegrange. Above all, he wrote in the 1940s that certain aspects of the Nouvelle Théologie were going to lead to a rebirth of modernism. So he, in fact, was a prophet. He was a traditionalist before the modern traditionalist period because he understood what was going on in the 1940s. And he said, this will return to modernism. This is one of the aspects of what we want to do is recovering this zeal of our forefathers, beginning with Father Reginald Gary Goulegrange. And then we have what he influenced was the encyclical Humani Generis, which was about some false opinions threatening to undermine Catholic doctrine. Once again, the writing was on the wall. The warning was there before Vatican II. And then at Vatican II, it was the Cetus Internationalis Patrum. This was the minority group, which was especially the Curia. It was made up of the Roman theologians in the Curia, but as the name suggests, it was international. In particular, two bishops, one, Archbishop Lefebvre, who was a Frenchman but had worked in Africa for decades before this, and De Castro Meyer, who was from Brazil, and others. They were an international working group, and they were working against the other group, which was the European Alliance. At OnePeterFive, we are trying to promote the thought of the Cetus Internationalis Patrum. That is our role in the United Clans movement. So we're not trying to promote other aspects of other people. We're trying to promote the thought of Lefebvre, Ottaviani, De Castro Meyer, and the others in the Cetus. Now, this was taken up by who is believed by some to be the doctor of the church of the 20th century, Dietrich von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand was a German philosopher who fought against National Socialism, Nazis, and communism. He fought both fearlessly, knowing he was about to be assassinated by Hitler. In fact, evidence suggests that Hitler invaded Austria to get Dietrich von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand was reported, the Nazis said that he was the number one enemy of the Nazis. So he's the hammer of the Nazis, the hammer of the Marxists. And in the 1950s, he moved to America. He became the hammer of the liberals, the liberal secular utilitarians in the American empire, in the United States, and Americanists. And then in the 1960s and 70s, this is why he's called the doctor of the church, he becomes the hammer of the spirit of Vatican II. What we're trying to do here at OnePeterFive is we're trying to do a restoring of these important texts. This is what we see as our role, is restoring and promoting, particularly Gary Lou Grange, Dietrich von Hildebrand, Michael Davies, Lefebvre, these godfathers, promoting and distilling their thought as a part of the overall movement of traditionalism to show Catholics that traditionalism is not schismatic. Anything that is against charity, we are preaching charity, because schism ultimately is against charity. That's what schism is. So when you accuse traditionalists of schism, well, you're accusing them of having a lack of charity. Now, are some trads lacking charity? Of course, we're all lacking in charity in some ways. We all need to grow in charity, but we will preach and promote charity at OnePeterFive because schism is a sin. And so we will promote charity. The definition of mortal sin is the destruction of charity in the soul. So if you commit a mortal sin, you're losing charity. You're sinning against charity. You've lost charity. You can't go to heaven without charity. If you don't have charity, you go to hell. Charity is everything. God is charity. He who loveth not knoweth not God, because God is charity. So we intend to make that very, very clear to all Catholics, whether they're trad or not, that traditionalism is not schismatic and is truth and charity. So that's the first thing that we intend to do. And once again, we rely on your donations because we need to have experts who are well-versed in these topics to write things on these people to promote their thought. And we need to pay them because the worker is worthy of his pay. So we rely on your donations. So please donate if you have any means. Donate for this effort. Now, that's the first plan. So the first plan is producing this written content, promoting this thought. Now, the second plan is in some ways far more practical because it talks about the day-to-day life of each and every one of you, faithful Catholics, building Christendom in your families, your local communities, your parishes, your municipalities, your villages, your states, your nations. And that's all the practical things that we want to promote at OnePeterFive. And that's all the other writing that we want to make. So we don't want to just we certainly don't want to be too academic with experts on all these people. We want to be very, very practical. As I said, providing the solutions that we need to do practically. And it starts with making a Satan pinata for Michaelmas for your kids. Because most importantly, we want to pass down this faith to the children. Here's how we beat the St. Gallen Mafia, is that we build Christendom in our families. As Andy pointed out earlier, we save our souls, we save our families. We build this Christendom in our families. I look once again, the Michael Matt family. We can look at the Matt family as a model. They've passed down the faith from the beginning of Der Wanderer in the 1870s. They passed down the faith to their children. They've kept the faith. They've kept this family business going. This is what we do to outlast the St. Gallen Mafia. The St. Gallen Mafia will not win because they can't build anything that lasts. As Pius XI says, anything that's not built on Jesus Christ will crumble. It will be destroyed because God will destroy it. Nothing that is not built on Jesus Christ will last. We may need to fight for another 40 plus years, but we will win this. But it starts with our own souls and our own families. Finally, I wanted to say the third point about how to beat the St. Gallen Mafia is to support good priests. We all need to support good priests in our area. The priests that we know personally, our own priest, any other priests. There's going to be more and more canceled priests, and they need our support. We need to support the good priests who are willing to disobey a bishop in order to obey God. As we saw last year, bishops were even able to disobey divine law Bishops were disobeying divine law by telling their priests not to administer the last sacraments. Even we had priests or canon lawyers and moral theologians condemning this as a violation of the divine law. Bishops do not have the authority to stop priests from administering the last sacraments to dying people, dying souls. They don't have that authority. Every priest is completely within their rights to disobey their order from any bishop, because that is the salvation of souls. No bishop can say that. And when priests disobey that, they are going to be canceled by their own bishops, and they need our support. They need to know that the sheep love them as their fathers, and they run to them as children to their father, because they know that their father will fight for them. We intend at OnePeterFive, our mission is to rebuild Christendom. That is what we are for. We are for Christendom first, and then we are against modernism, because we are for the truth, goodness, and beauty of Christendom. And in order to do that, we then must combat all the lies, the evil, and the ugliness of modernity.